Ever imagine, like, the farthest north you could possibly fly on a scheduled flight? That's where we're headed today.
Really puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
It does. We're talking about the Svalbard Global Seed Vault,
Yeah.
way up in the Arctic Circle. It's like this fortress for seeds, a global backup drive for our food supply. You ever heard of it?
Definitely not your average storage unit. And it's not just about the remoteness, though it certainly adds to the whole mystique.
Oh, absolutely.
The Svalbard Global Seed Vault is really about addressing a very real and present danger, the fact that genobanks around the world are, well, vulnerable.
Yeah, makes sense. We've all seen those disaster movies, right?
Right.
Wars, earthquakes, floods. Just the potential for something crazy to happen feels like it's always kind of looming out there.
And it's not just the big dramatic stuff. I mean, those are definitely a factor, but even everyday things. I'm talking power outages, equipment malfunctions, a freezer failing. Any one of those things could be just devastating to a seed collection.
Okay, so it sounds like this seed vault is like taking out an insurance policy for, well, for the global food supply.
That's a great way to put it.
And speaking of coverage, we were looking at this document from the Crop Trust, and they really lay out the scale of this whole operation. Are you ready for this? They have the capacity to store up to 4.5 million crop varieties.
That's a lot of seeds.
It's a mind-boggling 2.5 billion seeds.
It's not just about, hoarding seeds, though. It's about diversity.
Oh, okay.
We're talking rice, wheat, potatoes, those essential crops that, really are the bedrock of diets globally.
It's like a safeguard against a monoculture meltdown, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like if something were to happen and a huge part of a staple crop, got wiped out, this is the backup plan.
So you've got billions of these seeds, carefully curated from all around the globe. How do they make sure that they actually stay viable for, potentially centuries?
So it's a whole system, very meticulously designed.
Yeah.
Each seed sample is sealed up in this special 3-ply foil packet, and it's very high-tech.
Like a little sleeping bag?
Exactly. They're meant to keep moisture out, pests out. It's basically like hitting the pause button on the aging process.
Wow. And then they just put them in boxes.
Yeah, so then they box them all up, put them on these shelves in this giant vault, climate-controlled. They keep it at a steady negative 18 degrees C.
They really went all out with this thing.
Oh, yeah. Maintaining a facility like that takes a lot of resources, a lot of international cooperation. But, it just goes to show the global understanding of how important this really is.
It's like a global insurance policy that everyone's paying into.
Exactly.
This whole thing reminds me of, I was reading about the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. I think it's called ITPG-RFA, though.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of that one?
Absolutely. And it's a big deal.
So it's like the Seed Vault has this partner in crime out there.
I like that, yeah.
Both of them working to protect the food supply.
Yeah, they're both part of this much larger global push to, make sure we can feed everybody in the future, especially as things change.
Because it's not all perfect, right?
Right.
Like with any big project, especially one this massive, there are going to be some, wrinkles. There are going to be people who say, well, what about this?
Definitely.
And that's actually a good segue to our next source.
Yeah.
We found a really interesting article in Scientific American, and it really kind of makes you think twice about some things.
Oh.
So we're going to dive into that right after this.
The Scientific American piece we found, it really kind of pokes some holes in the happy story we've been telling about the seed vault.
Oh, really? How so?
Yeah.
Seems like a pretty foolproof plan. I mean, what could possibly go wrong with this super secure, climate-controlled vault buried deep in the Arctic permafrost?
We'll get this. In 2017, the Seed Vault, this place designed to protect us against climate change, flooded because of climate change.
You're kidding. That sounds like something out of a movie. It's kind of ironic when you think about it.
Talk about unpredictable. And Naomi Oreskes, she wrote this piece, and she brings up a really important point about what's happening up there. It's called polar amplification.
Polar amplification. That sounds kind of ominous, like something's being amplified at the poles.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, the Arctic is heating up a lot faster than anywhere else on the planet.
So we might be seeing some gradual changes in other places, but the Arctic is, really feeling the heat.
Exactly. And that's the problem, because that means the permafrost, that permanently frozen ground the seed vault's built on, it's thawing way faster than anyone expected.
So the ground beneath the vault is literally becoming less stable.
And on top of that, When that permafrost thaws, you have more melted ice, which means a much higher risk of flooding, even in a place built to withstand some pretty intense conditions.
This arrests seems like she knows what she's talking about. Does she have any solutions, or is she just pointing out all the ways this could go wrong?
Oh, she goes way beyond that. She really digs into the limitations of these seed banks in general. Like when you think about it, the seeds locked away in this vault, they aren't part of the natural process of selection and adaptation.
So even if we manage to keep these seeds good for hundreds of years, they might not even grow in the future if the environment's that different.
It's definitely something to think about. I mean, what grows well today might not do so well in a world with a different climate or different soil. And that's not even considering the new pests and diseases that might pop up.
It's kind of humbling, all this effort to preserve the past, but we can't even really wrap our heads around what the future will be like.
And then there's the logistics of it all, too. Even if we manage to reintroduce a crop variety decades down the line, where do we even plant it? How do we integrate it into whatever agricultural systems exist then? It's probably going to be totally different.
Trying to force a square peg into a round hole, it really makes you wonder about those crops that can't just be stored as seeds, too. What happens to them?
That's another great point Arisk brings up. This whole seed banking thing, it's great, but it might be giving us a false sense of security if we're not careful. There's a whole world of agricultural diversity out there, and not all of it revolves around seeds.
So the seed vault is important, yeah, but it's just one piece of this giant puzzle.
And, to her credit, Oreskes doesn't shy away from some of the less talked about parts of this project, like the cost and what it does to the environment.
What do you mean? I just assumed it was all powered by renewable energy, being way up in the Arctic and all.
Unfortunately not. Keeping everything that cold takes a ton of energy, and Svalbard still depends a lot on fossil fuels. It's almost ironic. A facility designed to help us survive climate change is actually contributing to the problem.
Look, we're trying to outrun a problem that we created.
And that gets right to the heart of Oresk's argument. Seed banks, like the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, they have a purpose, sure, but we can't let them become a distraction from actually dealing with why climate change is happening in the first place.
It's so tempting to focus on those technological fixes, but we can't lose sight of the bigger picture, can we?
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. Yeah, it might help a little in the short term, but it's not going to fix the actual problem.
So what do we do? I mean, is there a way to balance the hope that the seed vault represents with the very real threat of climate change? I think we need to dig into that a little more after a quick break. So we have this incredible seed vault, this global effort to safeguard our future. But like we've been talking about, it's not just as simple as, locking away these seeds and hoping for the best, right?
Yeah, it really gets you thinking about what kind of future we're actually trying to prepare for.
Exactly. Like, are we so worried about things going wrong that we're just stuck on damage control instead of, actually trying to prevent the damage?
I think that's the big question here, isn't it? This whole seed vault, it represents hope, yeah, but also a lot of anxiety about the future.
And that just makes me think, like, even if everything goes perfectly, climate change doesn't become as bad as we thought it would, those seeds could be in that vault for hundreds of years.
Wow, yeah.
What would the world even look like when they're finally planted?
That's something we just don't know. But it really makes you think about the responsibility we have making these decisions for generations that haven't even been born yet.
Right. It's like sending a message in a bottle and having no idea who's going to read it or what they'll do with it.
And that's where it gets really interesting. We're not just talking about the science of preserving seeds anymore. This is about philosophy, about trying to control the future of food and agriculture.
We're talking about the ingredients that future generations will have to work with.
Yeah. It means we need to keep talking about this stuff, really thinking critically about it. The seed vault shouldn't be the end of the conversation, just the beginning.
It has to be part of a much bigger conversation about sustainability, about making sure we have a diverse range of crops and what we owe to the people who come after us.
I think that's a really great point. It's easy to look at something like the seed vault and think, okay, we're taking care of the future. But the future isn't some fixed thing, it's something we create.
Every decision we make shapes that future. So, wow, this deep dive has been quite a journey, hasn't it? We started out talking about this incredible facility, this marvel of engineering, and we ended up talking about philosophy and the future of humanity.
I know. It just goes to show you never really know where these deep dives are going to take us, and that's what makes them so interesting.
That's for sure. But for now, we've reached the end of this deep dive. But before we go, one last thing to think about. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault is all about protecting the future. But what are we each doing today in our own lives to help create a future worth protecting?
That's a great question to leave everyone